Please meet today's guest, Kathleen Lucente.
Red is my power color. I feel like it's powerful. It's just it says what I need it to say.
What if the difference between landing your Series A and getting passed over isn't your product, it's your story? Today's guest knows this better than anyone. Kathleen Lucente has seen startups from every angle as a tech journalist who could spot the unprepared founders from a mile away, as the head of communications for JPMorgan Chase across 18 countries in Asia Pacific, and now as the founder of her own strategic communications firm, Redfan. She's the person who managed communications for JPMorgan during 9/11. She's repositioned investment banks and helped IBM Research tell stories that moved stock prices. And she's got a grit story involving cowboy boots, a stubborn Motorola executive, and a 25-year-old's courage that you won't want to miss. But here's what matters for you. Kathleen believes most startups are approaching fundraising backwards. They're chasing press when they should be building narrative. They're defining ideal customer profiles when they should be finding super consumers. And they're waiting too long to get strategic about communications. So if you're a founder who thinks marketing and PR are just window dressing, prepare to have your mind changed. Let's dive in. Welcome, Kathleen, to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here, Jothy. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, I always start this way. I like to know where you're originally from and where you live now.
Oh, okay. Here we go. I grew up on the North Shore of Long Island in New York, about halfway out, raised by a mom from Boston and a dad from New York. Very distinct accents in that household. And now I currently live in Austin, Texas.
Did your mom and dad root for different teams?
Yes, they did.
Oh my God, that must have been fireworks.
Oh, it was energetic. It's interesting because they both met up in Boston, so I think they truly did have an allegiance for the Red Sox, but my dad couldn't let go of. I grew up going to actually Shea Stadium, the old Shea Stadium, and we had box seats right off first base. And I learned how to keep score early on. There are no boys in my family, so my dad really I'm the oldest, so he was like, "You're going to learn how to keep score." So I did.
Well, that's fun. We went down and we took the ferry across, and we went on a wine tasting weekend, and I had no idea that
Yeah.
out
It's
there in that cold climate, they could make some awfully good wine.
You are 100% correct. In fact, when I was growing up, those were all like potato fields, and you still can get incredible, squash and all sorts of things. But the wine industry out there started when I was probably in elementary school, if not sooner, and it has evolved beautifully. So I'm always impressed, and I always make a shot back out there to kind of see. And I've got a couple of vineyards I like in particular.
So for a while, you were a tech journalist, and you were talking to and about startups and in some of that work you were doing. And then you kind of, I don't know if we would call it switching sides, but then you started helping startups, directly yourself. And so, what's and the firm you have now is all about communications and how to communicate and whatnot. So what do you think the difference is between how startups today communicate or should, and back during you know, the dot-com era, which to me seems like just yesterday, but what wasn't?
Well, I think I think people still are scrappy, which I appreciate that energy. I think you need to be scrappy and effective in using your budget when you're a startup. What I would say is, when I was a journalist, I had usually PR people were bringing people in to see me. And what I found was some people were prepared and some people weren't. They would often just get dropped off with a press release and not prepped and didn't think about their messaging. And no, what I witnessed was a very real difference between how people were getting prepared and how the CEO knew how to use the resources that they were paying for and vice versa. So I think today what I'm seeing is startups are getting more VC money. They're getting people who are operators early on, working with them. They're being a little bit more smarter about, uh, still being frugal about their money, but starting wisely with understanding the competition's fierce, and you can quickly become a commodity business if you don't differentiate yourself. So I really appreciate seeing CEOs of startups and entrepreneurs creating what I call like a virtual group of people that are their advisors that are not necessarily getting paid off the bat, that are kind of early stage champions of the company. And so picking the finance person, picking somebody who understands operations, how to scale your sales team, and then where does marketing and communications fit in the mix, and why marketing and communications is going to help drive the ability to get that round of funding that they're hoping for, not just window dressing.
And I think it's really important that they understand that at the early stage, it is actually much smarter to use external resources, especially in the marketing area, just because you don't really need and you can't afford a full time marketing person, except maybe in the case where you are worried about things that need to stay within the company, you know, certain concepts and things that, a marketing person might be developing over time. Just like you don't want to outsource too much of your engineering because you've got to keep that within the company. But the same thing is true of marketing. But you don't need a bunch of marketing people in the early
No.
days until you've proven product market fit.
Yeah, I've actually been talking a lot about this. We had Startup Week here in Austin, Texas, and I did a overview of, who do you hire first and who do you hire as external partners? And so if you are, strong PR partners do want to have a liaison internally. So even if you have sort of a manager of marketing or a marketing coordinator who's helping go back and forth between the C suite, it helps you get more done and the efficiency is more effective. So I do recommend that. I always recommend that that person be a really strong writer because they're probably helping to manage your social media. And they're also probably helping with blogs and things of that nature. So they really need to be a good writer, but also extremely organized. And so those are kind of skill sets that I like to see. And then export the rest, right? If you can get a really strong sort of fractional CMO, fractional communications person who can help you get your brand positioning, then you're using your funds a lot more effectively. You're getting strategy from someone you can't afford to have on board full time, which that just makes sense.
Yes, so I get a good score from I get a good grade from you because I always hire somebody who's roughly a director of marketing, who's a good writer. That person really, if they're going to be focusing on communications and helping the CEO, even with their slide decks for pitch, for fundraising, they're a marketing communications person, an outbound marketing person, and so but of course to get your minimum viable product and your product market fit done, you need an inbound marketing person.
You
and
do.
and so what's always the challenge is that I end up having that person be someone in engineering. Like sometimes it's
Mhm,
actually the VP of engineering
mhm.
who takes on the role of product management, until marketing is growing. And then at that point, you're kind of, moving that function back over.
I
It's
think that's really
challenging
important.
sometimes.
I mean, before I started, doing what I'm doing, I would say, there's a couple of things really helping companies start to understand who their super consumers are, right? I'm always amazed at like how often startups will come in and say, well, I'll say, who are you marketing to? I'm like, well, everybody, or it's just too broad, right? And what I've found is once you've hit at least $1 million in revenue, you really then can look back and see who your super consumers are, right? Who are the repeat customers, the ones that are buying more than one product from you, the ones that are raving about you. And they start to become like, okay, these are the people that we want to replicate. We want to do more of that. And then your marketing and your PR team, can work with the engineering and sales team and say, okay, let's really figure out how to reach those individuals through multiple channels. And so a lot of companies unfortunately stick with their ICP, their ideal customer profile, and that's too broad often. I mean, especially for startups, it's very hard to kind of decide who do you want to market to and how are you going to differentiate yourself. Like more time needs to be spent there than most startups actually spend.
Absolutely. I think, and one of the reasons that's so hard for a lot of tech startups is because tech startups tend to be founded by tech people, and the tech people have a really hard time with the concept of cold calling people that they've found, maybe even through LinkedIn, which is a
Right.
fine way to find them. But then you got to cold call them, uh, and and try to get that conversation going. And I tell people, look, I want you to talk to a minimum of 15 of those kind of people and aim for 40. And
Right.
that just blows their minds.
Yeah.
That's hard.
That is hard. I think that um I've worked with in the tech space since my 20s, and so first with, as a journalist, and then I was at a PR firm in Boston, and then I was in New York, and it goes on and on, but I was always working with engineers that were then product managers. And it's amazing, just trying to help them understand, you're talking about all the gizmos inside, but you really need to get the narrative right and understand who you are speaking to and why they should care. Because somebody who wants to go deeper, we know you'll know how to go deeper into that conversation. But first you got to get them up in this level where they even want to be interested in the conversation to begin with. And that is hard. Actually, there's a course at University of Texas Austin here, and it's actually for engineers helping them learn how to speak that way.
If you do the LinkedIn thing, and you can really target, pretty accurately the kinds of industries and the kinds of people. But in order to catch their attention, you've got a real challenge. You've got a very small, I forget what it is, but it's like 300 characters that they allow you in that message. The old adage is, if I'd had more time, I could have written a shorter book.
You good old Hemingway.
Yeah. Um, and you've got to catch them with that.
Can
And
tell who has not done their homework, right? As well. They're just blasting. And I, call it spraying and praying, which
right.
is never good in any business. It's not a good way to go.
So tell me about this time that you spent at Lab Morgan.
Sure.
How did you get there?
Well, I was at a high-tech PR firm in New York City, and it was during the dot-com boom. I was bringing companies public, and I was, doing major rounds of funding. I was doing M&A work, and I was doing a work in many different verticals, but predominantly all B2B. And I got a call from a number of people saying, you need to go over and talk to the executives at Chase. And I said, "Well, why?" I had just become partner, and I said, "Maybe I can go over and talk to them and hopefully help them find another." I can always happy to help people find the right person. And it turned out that once I got over there, it turned out that it was Chase had a incubator called Chase.com, and they were eventually going to be merging with JPMorgan, which had Lab Morgan, and they were trying to get me on board so I would be able to head up all tech communications for the firm. And so Lab Morgan was really, they had worked with numerous recruiters and were not coming up with the right person. They needed someone who understood tech. And as you know, from my early days being a tech journalist, one of the reasons why I was hired as a PR person early on at Andy Cunningham's organization representing Motorola 68,000 microprocessors, which is, the super nerdiest job of all time, which I loved. It was because I could write about very challenging technologies and make them attractive to your grandmother as well as an engineer. And so, or the New York Times, I think I'm the first person who got Moore's Law mentioned early years ago in the New York Times. No journalist could get their head around it, and I was able to help them. So it's the kind of thing that was really, really interesting to me that I went over there, and when I suddenly realized what the job opportunity was, it just seemed like a perfect fit because Lab Morgan was a combination of the venture capital arm of the firm, along with investing and spinning off technologies from that we'd created within the firm as well as technologies outside. So, say it was a derivatives platform that we created, we might spin it off as a separate company, put somebody as a CEO, and then I would be supporting and helping them figure out what kind of communication strategy they needed, if they needed a PR firm, if they needed to hire someone internally. So, I was managing a pretty large portfolio there, and it was fantastic.
Lab Morgan, is that how you ended up over in Asia as well?
Well, that was an interesting spin. So what happened was 9/11 happened, right? So I was living in New York City and fairly newly married. I think it was just my 1 year wedding anniversary. And but 9/11 happened, and I managed the communications for 9/11 with my boss at JPMorgan Chase, and we had to handle lots of different things. But just before it, my boss, uh, Fred Hill, who reported to Bill Harrison at the time, he said, "Look, there's an issue in Asia. Can we've got a guy from J.P. Morgan and a woman from Chase. We never decided who will be the head of communications, and we've got 18 countries all wondering, and a new chairman there from Goldman Sachs that needs a communications strategy strong. Will you go out and sort of see what's going on and what we need to do?" So I went out right after 9/11, about 3 weeks after, left my husband behind in New York City and went out there. And about 2 months into it, I got a call saying, "Hey, would you consider staying there? We'd like to have you be the senior VP of corporate communications for all of Asia Pacific." And so that was fantastic. And so called my husband and said, "Hey, you want to do this?" I almost forgot I was married, by the way. I had to call him like, "By the way, remember you said this might happen? It's actually happening." He said, "I told you." And keep in mind, my husband is a PhD from MIT. So, um, he had been a drop-in CTO at a company that he was trying to fix in New York City, and he had done a great job. So he helped position somebody else into the role and came on over with me.
Oh, good. And then he was there every day, so you remembered that you had a
I
husband.
remembered I was married. I was like, "Goodness gracious." Well, it was funny because our original plan was I was gonna only be there for 3 months. We wind up being there 5.5 years, and, he wound up being the head of China Light and Power Alternative Energy, and I obviously took on the role that I had. And actually our daughter, who's now 21, I gave birth to her there on the peak there, so, but it was a really important job because and I would say what was super exciting about it was not only was I doing a four-way merger out there, so we had multiple banks that we had merged out there. We had plummeted to number 5 as an investment bank because our equity program was not built out. Chairman said to me, "I want to build this out. Can you get me to number 1, number 2?" I said, "If you do what you say you're going to do, I will make that happen." And so I assessed the team, made some hires, made some fires, and built out the team that was really kind of able to take us there.
After that, you've been up here in the clouds with all the giant titans of huge corporations, and then you decided to create your own startup.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because I had been told I'd worked in boutique PR firms and big PR firms. I ran PR for IBM Research worldwide, and was working with engineers and Nobel Prize winners every day, telling their stories and dusting off these incredible stories that were had not been told to kind of raise the value of IBM stock, right? So it was easy for me to kind of look at all the things that we did at JP Morgan. I took things that were commoditized, like a merger and acquisition announcement or these types of things, and really started looking at how do you add value? How do you really differentiate this business? And so, if I could take that brand positioning work I had done and apply it to startups, they could have a leg up long before having to make the mistakes that many companies make. And so I started Redfan specifically focused on B2B companies in the tech industry that I felt deserved investment banking mindset communications, as in, I know you want to grow. I know you want the momentum. You need this level of thinking that it's not just window dressing. We are building something together.
Hi there. I hope you're enjoying the show. In addition to the podcast, you might also be interested in the online program I have created for startup founders called Who Says You Can't Startup. In it, I've tried to capture everything I've learned in the course of founding and running 9 startups over 37 years with no constraints like there were with my book, Tech Startup Toolkit. The program is 4 courses, each one about 15 video lessons, plus over 30 high-value downloadable resources. Each course individually is only $375. The QR code will take you where you can learn more. Now, back to the podcast. Well, that is so true. In the building of your own startup, and then we'll talk some more about, what you've been able to do with it. But in the building of it, most of us that are building a startup make a few mistakes. Did anything go sideways for you on Redfan?
Well, of course. It, it's the most humbling role ever when you're starting your own business. Everything from, you might not have an operations person and you get bamboozled by somebody with a phone system that's just garbage, right? You rip that out for $5,000 and start all over again. Or, I think early on, having clients that being really more selective, right? Having clients that you say yes to because you're just trying to get things going and maybe they really aren't the right fit. And you realize pretty quickly, not the right fit. And so I think those are the types of lessons early on that I took to heart. I'm building something. I want to make sure that we're not taking on the wrong clients. I want to make sure it's always a win-win for both. And then also hiring the right people, really, really thinking about, okay, I need this person now, but how do I make sure I hire who I need 6 months to a year from now? Is this person going to be able to grow with me? And I think those decisions were really, really important early on.
Why did you name it Red Fan?
Okay. Yeah, that was interesting. So I come from a family of lawyers and judges in New York City. So I kept thinking in my mind, I am not naming this after my name and then like a partner and a this and a that. I didn't want that model. I started thinking about Red Fan probably when I was flying back from Hong Kong. I kind of had that idea in my head. And I looked at it from when you look at a fan, as in like an Asian fan that you would, kind of cool yourself with. They have fins. If I'm looking at my hand, you've got great people, great products, great partners, great services, great community. And when you bring all those fins together at the base, they structurally create, the fan. And without that, it falls apart. And so really when you're doing the work I do, it's not about one person, it's around all those things. And so Redfan, it's a structural example of that's what it takes to do the right thing for your client.
Yeah, but why red and not blue or green or yellow?
Red is my power color. I don't
Uh,
I feel like it's powerful. It's just it says what I need it to say. And it's a very distinct color red if you look at our website. It's kind of like an orangey red. It's the kind of red you see if you're in Hong Kong and you're traveling around and you see like wood painted. It's that distinct color red, and it gives me a lot of warmth. That was also my sayonara to the corporate world, right? So I was like, I'm leaving. I'm going to build my own thing, and really, Asia was my last stop on that corporate, train.
and did you set it up from the beginning in Austin?
I did, but I would say I set it up in Austin and but my initial clients were all coming from New York and Boston because of my network there. And I found myself traveling extensively and my kids were little. And I remember thinking, I need to really put some roots down here in Austin. And so I did. And now we have clients in Israel, we have clients in California, we've got clients all over. But it's nice that we're very well known in our market. And we also do a lot of really cool nonprofit work here too. And we sponsor, like things like the A List, which is looking at startups and venture capital that are doing really interesting things in our community, and well beyond our community, but have been seeded here. Boston is such a cool place. I loved going to grad school there and then working there and building such an incredible network. And I found that, women would really introduce each other to each other quite a bit if they'd find each other. I was kind of a odd commodity in the sense that there weren't that many women doing tech PR when I was doing it. And in fact, I was recruited to New York City by Ketchum, and they still all had dumb terminals, on their desks. I remember early on, and they were like, "We hired this tech PR woman," and I remember they had this huge Sony screen, and people would walk by like I was a sci-fi, creature or something. Like, the room was like glowing up and stuff like that. But yeah, making those connections early on, is so important, and I've continued to maintain them.
When a woman is in a big company, a public company, and is still the only woman in the room.
That I will tell you, I mean, that was my life since my 20s, right? Because I what happened was I was, got my master's degree at Boston College, right? And I went up over at Connors, which then was bought by Reed Elsevier, and I was surrounded by engineers. I was the only woman really writing on the staff, and then I kept going from there. And so every industry I've been in, I was often the only woman in that room, but I really learned how to hold myself and be a good role model for other women and men, really, quite frankly. And I think it's an interesting thing of confidence that you kind of have to just pull it together. Investment banking, that's a big one, right? There's, also quite male dominated. While there are women, I found myself, really needing to go in and explain, like, nope, if you want to do this deal, you need to add some value. So, if you care about the client reputation, let's add something different that Goldman Sachs won't have. So let's do an analysis of the reputation of your client domestically and internationally. And the bankers were blown away. Like no one else was doing that. Being able to always be I think curiosity is like the thing, it just drives you. Have you ever watched the show The West Wing?
Of course, I love
Well,
it.
CJ, Craig, who's very
Yes.
tall, she's called the flamingo. She's very insulted at first about that. Um, I just rewatched the entire thing with my husband recently, and it was just such a it's so refreshing and thinking about the media relations part and all the things that are going on behind the scenes. So interesting.
It's especially refreshing to watch that given what's going on in the real world.
I would say so. I almost wanted to be like, please make this true. Make this real.
So you've been an advisor and a writer and you've worked in the huge companies. Where did you glean all of the experience that you need to have to be able to give advice to startup founders about what they should be doing at this stage, and then what should they be getting ready for, and when should they be you know raising money and all
Yeah,
those kinds of things.
I would say certainly at Lab Morgan, watching, I mean, while it's a different time now, I would say Lab Morgan, watching startups, bringing them public and also helping companies through difficult times and helping CEOs. And today, I would say that the most important thing, is that I'm applying both the big stuff that I've learned at big companies as well as small, because what's happening is you're taking companies, a startup, and you're saying, okay, what is your desired future state and how are we going to get there? And that's the level of conversation I expect to have with a client. And then, it's not, hey, can you get me some press? Usually people show up at a PR agency saying, we need press. And I say, okay, why do you need press? So we're sitting down and helping them understand. They usually are very upfront about the financials they're trying to reach or the funding rounds they're trying to reach. And so one of the things we're doing, and we're doing this right now with a company we're repositioning, they're in the agri-tech space. They are all engineers. We're repositioning them for for a huge round of funding in early 2026. And that we had to look at what was wrong with their messaging. They had been going and they've got some customers and they've done fairly well, but they're not punching through and they've got a very unique story. And so getting that brand narrative right, because they're not going to get the funding then if we don't get that right. And then we'll actually help them build out their investor deck as well through that process. But you have to start with what's not working and be vulnerable. So we're expecting a startup founder and their team to be willing to be vulnerable in order to punch through the ceiling that they're not cutting through to. And that's really, really important. And I would say back in the .com phase and even with that Lab Morgan, we're at a different level of sophistication today. In terms of where communication and venture capital or are coming together and partnering on these things versus everyone in silos. The problem when people are in silos is that you're spending a lot of time running around talking to different people. And as a founder, you're not sure who to listen to. And so when you can get partners that come together, it really makes a big difference.
Okay, so if you could give founders who have not yet raised money one single key piece of advice, what would it be? About communications that they should get right before they take money.
I believe that unless you want to lose a lot from investors, you need to invest yourself for a while and get your brand narrative right, get some customers, get your beta going, and really have data that you can point to, competitive analysis. You don't want to be going in and talking to investors when you're so early stage and they could almost eat you up, eat you alive, right? You want to make sure you've got this is really, really strong because that also then tells you which investors you should even be approaching. Which portfolio are you going to fit in the best? Who's going to understand you the most? Which investors can do more for you where it's going to be a partnership versus people barking orders at you, where you've got to set the table. You've got to really set the table as a startup. And that means I would say having a very strong communications strategist that's working with you is essential. And making sure all of the communication, your website, everything you have about you starts to really hang together, including your LinkedIn. And I would make sure I have a checkbox, I have a readiness box, if you will, of a list of things that I usually ask them to make sure everything is coming together. And then we start looking at, okay, investors, let's talk about which investors are going to be the right investors and which ones do you want to approach first. I'm a startup, right? I've been around 17 years, but I put my own money where my mouth was early on to establish my brand. I learned early on, these are some mistakes. I'm not going to do them. Some customers that, where I took them on maybe made money, but I realized that's not where I want to be. And then I made sure that all of my communication, the tip of the spear, is attracting the clients that I really, really want.
The previous discussion, the founders that we were talking about just a second ago, you were referring to they're getting ready for their Series A funding, though, right?
Or even seed funding. But Series A, even seed funding, I think if you're trying to get things together, there's some basic strategy that should be in place around how you're communicating, right? Because if, you're going to go from seed to A or wherever you are in the journey, there's certain things you want to get right, and getting your brand narrative and what your value proposition is, right, is super, super important before you go ask for seed money. Because you might get seed money from the wrong person. I remember a startup coming to see me and they had gotten seed money from somebody who their expectations were completely off. They were expecting to get their return on that money really fast as well. And
That's bad.
so there's a lot of conversation that needs to go on. They're like, well, it's my friend's brother's cousin and he's got all this money. He wants to give it to me. Wrong guy to go to. He's going to be a pain in your butt for a long, long time. It's nice to know that you're talking to people who have been investors in the past, and that they care to understand your narrative. They care to understand how you want to set things up.
The reason I wanted to, zero in on this is that the I believe the criteria for raising your Series A is pretty clear. You've got to have proven product market fit, and you've got to have
Right.
at
For
least
Series.
3 paying customers if we're talking about the B2B kind of models.
Right.
but that getting the Series seed is much more about who you are, what your vision is. Uh, do you understand the market and the problem? But it's not about having paying customers yet.
Right.
You know,
Absolutely. You can't the expectation is not that. But you do have to have your vision. You have to have what you're, why you think you're what you think is this what is the void in the market that you're actually filling.
right?
And those types of things. And that's brand positioning. That
Yeah,
is part of brand positioning. And, if you just have blinders on and you haven't done your competitive analysis to see who else is serving this market, even if it's something that's kind of tertiary, but it's very close to what you're doing, you need to make sure that you're aware of that in your competitive analysis. So you aren't building something that, it doesn't have the staying power or,
hmm
or when the market's down and your B2B target customer is saying, well, where do I want to spend my money? Which tool or service is going to you know, give me the fastest outcomes I'm looking for. And, you're trying to understand like who your target customer even is.
absolutely. Okay, my last question is uh gonna be a little bit different. I want to know where does your grit come from? What is your grit story?
Wow. I think you know, I'm the oldest in a family of two. I came from, like I said, families of lawyers and judges. I think ethics has always been a really big thing that I grew up with. And so I've always been kind of one of these people that's looking very deeply at, being able to read the room and read the tea leaves, if you will, and like kind of be able to understand. And what I found early on in my life is that my gut instincts tell me a lot about what's going on, what's not being said, which is equally as important. And so the grit for me is probably because I grew up in this like very in business wise in this very male dominated industry. I had to kind of stand up for myself. And early on, even as a high tech journalist, I was surrounded by engineers that were from Grumman, and I was reviewing their copy and like going in, and they were fairly gruff, these fellas, these fellas when I was young, and they
And this was
appreciated,
in your 20s, right?
yeah, they appreciated me
Must have
coming in
been
and,
frightening.
oh yeah, and these are men that were sitting around, yeah, they'd been engineers and they're writing, I would say, hey. I'm reading through this. I think if I'm looking at this, I think a diagram would fit in really beautifully here since you're trying to educate other engineers and made some jumps and assumptions here. And being able to have that conversation with men in their 40s, 50s, that were proven in their industry, I found that, first of all, I had a really good way about me and I could do that. And I didn't hurt their ego and I actually made their pieces a lot stronger, and we wound up having a great relationship. So I think that might be also my relationship with my dad and my mom. I'm very lucky. I just grew up in a way where we could debate and have conversations and question things and still show a lot of respect. And so I'm lucky that I had that foundation early on. So today at age 58, I'm still cracking the whip, but I still do it in a very effective way. And I have a nurturing side of me as well that it's really looking out for those entrepreneurs so they can truly be successful and so I can have brutally frank conversations that are going to advance them. And I think that that's where I guess my grit comes from. Here's a funny little story. I remember one day I had to fly down here for Motorola, and there was an executive who he probably was in his 30s, but he looked a lot older at the time because he was just seemed overworked, and he was in charge of a major microprocessor announcement. And the microprocessor forum had put out an article that just kind of dinged him against Intel, and he was in a really bad mood. And I was probably about 25, and I flew down here, and I had interviews set up with the Wall Street Journal, I had CNN, it was a major breakthrough. And I got to his office, and he said, I'm really mad about that guy this guy that did this. I said, you can be mad, but he's going to see his folly because we're going to keep pushing here. And he said, I think I want to cancel all the press interviews. And so I got up and I took on his whiteboard, I said, "You see all the people outside here who've been sweating it and building this product here that have been dying to announce this? It's taken this long." I said, "Okay," I wrote down Wall Street Journal. I wrote down, EDN, all the different publications, CNN, all these interviews that were supposed to be lined up. I said, "You're telling me you want to steal this amazing opportunity to get great press on your incredible achievement." And he said, he looked at the whiteboard, he goes, "Okay, we'll do it." I remember thinking, "Oh, thank God," but I was a little scared in he had cowboy boots on, he had his feet up on the desk and with his suit, and I remember thinking, "I'm gonna change his mind. I'm changing his mind. He can't do that to his whole team just because he's in a bad mood." And by the way, we also got that other editor to turn around his story and write a really glowing one about 2 weeks later because he realized he was being a bit cheeky. So, eh, that's kind of just that's just the kind of person I am.
Very good. Um, I think that's a good grit story, and you've channeled it in a really good way to deal with the guys in cowboy boots and the and at the same time the scared the imposter syndrome suffering startup founder, you know.
100%. Yeah. It's every one of them is nervous about something. And when you can build that rapport where vulnerability can happen, so much more can happen as a partner when you can actually open up. And so finding the right partners, in all different aspects for entrepreneurs where you can truly open up, it's very valuable, to be able to be vulnerable with the right people so that they can help you advance.
Well, this has been great, Kathleen. I want to thank you for this great conversation and chance to get to know you, and I hope we can carry that forward.
Same here, Rothy. I cannot wait to read your book.
Oh, well, good. It's going to be on its way shortly to you.
Good.
Before we wrap up, let's pull out 3 critical tools from Kathleen's toolkit that you can use right now. Tool number 1, get your brand narrative right before you fundraise. Not just a pitch deck, a complete story about what void you're filling in the market and why you're the ones to fill it. Kathleen says if you don't invest in getting this right yourself first, you risk taking money from the wrong investors who will become a pain in your butt for years to come. Tool number 2, look beyond your ICP to find your super consumers. Once you hit about $1 million in revenue, stop marketing to everybody and start analyzing who's actually buying repeatedly, who's raving about you. These super consumers are your blueprint for growth, not some broad ideal customer profile. And tool number 3, bring in strategic communications early, but do it smart. You don't need a full marketing team yet. Hire one great writer internally who can be your liaison. Then bring in fractional strategic expertise externally. This gives you executive level thinking without executive level overhead. Now go find one person in your network who's been where you want to go, someone you can be truly vulnerable with about what's not working, because that's where your breakthrough lives. And that is our show with Kathleen. The show notes contain useful resources and links. Please follow and rate us at podchaser.com/designing successful startups. Also, please share and like us on your social media channels. This is Jothy Rosenberg saying TTFN, ta-ta for now.